Now, we've already met once today, so I'm going to keep it brief. I'm Robert Montano. I work for Adobe Systems in Basel. I'm a member of the Apache Software Foundation and very much involved in the Sling and Jackrabbit projects. Now, and also, I'm the very best Twitter account you want to follow. OK, maybe second very best, not the first very best, but anyway, if you're into Twitter, look me up. Now, click. OK, right. So, pretty standard agenda. We try to do something a bit different with the ID tooling this time. So we're going to talk about the motivation, what motivated us to take a more different or more radical approach to the ID tooling, what challenges did we encounter from a technical point of view, some interesting things, what we have done so far, and what are our plans for the future. OK, so I'm going to try to use some supporting quotes from famous computer science people, like Shakespeare, for instance. It's a little known fact that Shakespeare was actually an Emacs user. And when talking to a VI user, he called him leather jerkin, crystal button, not painted, a gathering, pute stocking, and to breathe, caris, smooth tongue, Spanish pouch. I'm not even sure what that means, but it can't be good, right? Someone calls you a Spanish pouch. Now, the point is that we programmers are very particular about our tools. I may like Eclipse, you may wrongfully like, I don't know what, IntelliJ or NetBeans or something else, but we get accustomed to their UIs, their workflows, their keyboard shortcuts, and even though we have alternatives or superior alternatives, we don't have an incentive to switch. So rather than building it and waiting for the developers to come, a superior approach is to build for all the possible experiences. Now, as a small trip down history lane, no, let's start this as well. The Sling IT tooling was wrong button. No, which one? Other green button, red button. OK, good. Now, the ID tooling was started somewhere in 2013. It's actually a small proof of concept, no, not so small, 5,000 lines of code by Antonio Sanso, that he just felt like doing that and seeing if some sort of ID tooling for Sling would work, and obviously it did. Now, a couple of months later, I had the honor of moving it from the Sling whiteboard to the actual Sling repository and incidentally getting my name on it. But I need to learn how to use these buttons better. OK. Now, it started in 2013. Until actually delivering this talk, I hadn't realized how much time has passed since we actually started working on the ID tooling, and conversely, how much effort we invested into it. And we had 2 major releases, or 3 major releases, and a number of minor releases, 2014, 16, 18. And they were all done for Eclipse. Now, from my point of view as a contributor scratching an itch and meeting my own need, that was absolutely fine. That was no problem, right? Because that's what I use, and that's what a number of other people use. And more importantly, that's what I knew how to develop against, right? Every IDE platform is different. They share common concepts, maybe common UI elements as a concept, as an idea, but you can't really program ID agnostic, not on the long run. But then the question came about, we're building tools for developers, and every developer is a potential contributor. So I came across this survey on the internet, which looks completely legit, so I'm just going to use it. It's a survey done in 2017 by Zero Turnaround. It says, hey, what IDE are you using? And for me, the key takeaway was that Eclipse is about a third, right? And AEM is a large enough program to say, this sort of looks like right. So even if it's half, even if it's a third, we are losing large chunks of contributors, of potential contributors that will not use our IDE tooling and contribute to our IDE tooling because it's not the program they know and love and use every day. So that got me thinking, okay, how can we make this more accessible for more developers? And well, obviously the question is just refactor it so it works in many IDEs. And you know, William Shakespeare also talked about software engineering, and he said, "Thou may not wander in that labyrinth, there minotaurs and ugly treasons lurk." So, sometimes it sounds nice, just refactor it. It's Java, right? Eclipse is Java, IntelliJ is Java, NetBeans is Java. Why not just go ahead and do it? Now, things aren't always that simple. One thing is that each IDE wants you to be able to easily develop against it. It doesn't want you to rewrite your whole program from scratch and then just do a little hook into an IDE. So yeah, this is a more or less relevant example from Eclipse. So if you like XML, you're going to be very happy with Eclipse plugin development. And it says, well, there's an extension point here, and this is the class I would like to instantiate as my extension. There's nothing more to it. But the point is that you start developing against a certain IDE, certain APIs, and even though you're following engineering best practices and abstracting, you are very much tied to a specific IDE. There's no way around it. Unless you start from the beginning and code against multiple IDEs, if you start with one, you're going to go with one to the end. And Eclipse offers you a lot. It gives you extensions for editors, for servers, for modules, for publishing. You end up writing a lot of glue code for Eclipse. And when the problem comes to port another IDE, that's when you get stuck a bit or a bit more. And something else which is very interesting, and it came up during some discussions we had on the Sling Jira, is that the same code, when you put it into multiple IDEs, starts to behave differently. You have the same API, but you have different count of invocations, or different order of invocations, or different threading models. And that can lead you to have very different performance criteria between, correctness criteria between different IDEs. So what works fine in Eclipse, for instance, will have a subtle behavior change in IntelliJ. And that's something that we worked quite a lot of time on. And these things you don't catch when refactoring. You don't necessarily catch when running unit tests. And probably those type of boundary conditions are not even visible in your integration tests, because we were going a lot back and forth and saying, okay, this works in Eclipse, this doesn't work in IntelliJ. Are you calling the same methods? Yes, I'm calling the same methods. And in the end, we realized that it was just a subtle lifecycle difference in IntelliJ. So those sort of things are pretty difficult when you're trying to build from a single code base set of plugins. Now, there's this thing about building Eclipse plugins, which really was one of the most interesting challenges that we had to face. Now, the supporting quote I have is, "Lying, the telling of beautiful, untrue things is the proper aim of art." And that's a quote about building Eclipse plugins with Maven. Now, here's a visual metaphor. I'm not sure if it actually says anything besides two yellow things. I'm not very good at visual metaphors, but this is a duck, and this is a building. And just like there is duck typing, I choose to call this duck building, because when building software projects, you have a thing where it looks like a duck, it sounds like a duck, it walks like a duck, but it's not a duck. And that's where building Eclipse plugins comes in. There is a very nice set of Maven plugins called Tycho, which allow you to run Maven clean install, and then your Eclipse plugins are built, packaged, tests are run in the Eclipse integration test harness, whatever that is. The update site is being built. It does everything for you. It looks like it's a regular Maven project. It logs. It fails like a regular Maven project, but it's not really a regular Maven project. And the problem we really encountered was that Eclipse and, well, regular Maven, let's call it like that, have different artifact repositories. Now, we all know Maven Central and the replica that you hold in your Maven home, in your directory, in M2 repository, but Eclipse doesn't really use that. Eclipse, being an OSGI project, uses something called a P2 repository, and it uses constraints and capabilities to resolve the set of bundles and other artifacts that it wants to use. And that's fine. But if you want to create a shared library that can be used between regular Maven projects that would support another IDE and Eclipse plugins, you're going to have a lot of fun. You can't mix them in the same reactor build. So you can't have Eclipse, something else, IntelliJ, NetBeans, blah, blah, and the same reactor build. It simply doesn't work. So we needed to have a very custom mixed setup. And as the famous Winston Churchill would say, success consists of going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm, which is really critical when doing large-scale software development. So some general guidelines is to extract APIs that are free from Eclipse, but also from any OSGI ties. Because we use OSGI a lot, that's what we know, but it doesn't work outside of Eclipse. The bad thing, well, the sad thing is that many times implementation are one-liner delegates to Eclipse APIs. And that ties back to the things I was saying that Eclipse and other IDEs offer you a lot in terms of support. And now you get to re-implement APIs that sometimes don't make sense for you just because you need another layer of abstraction. And then you would need to rethink component lifecycles to make them easier to reuse in other environments. Now, the build, we eventually managed to refactor it, and right now it's sort of split into 3 parts. So the first part is a set of shared modules that have no real external dependencies except utility classes like Commons Lang or Commons IO. And these are really the API that the consumers like Eclipse would use, and then the content sync implementation and some utility modules. These are regular Maven projects. You need to go for the lowest denominator in order to make them work. And the first step of the build is to create a Maven repository. And that's OK because we can then consume them from different other applications. We have a proof of concept command line application that you can just start and run with, and it uses the exact same code from here, just like Eclipse does. And then we have a special build step which generates a P2 repository. And then the full Eclipse build is able to pick up these artifacts from the P2 repository. And this opens up the field for all of these shared modules to be used from the Maven repository by other IDEs. So we basically have a 3 or rather 4-step process. First, we build the shared modules, install them in the Maven repository. Then we have another build which installs them in the P2 repository. Then we build the Eclipse plugins, and then we build the command line app. So it's a bit involved, but hey, in the end it works. But that's not all we did. I mean, the last release was a couple of years ago, and on talking about fixes, Alexander Pope said, "A man should never be ashamed to own that he has been in the wrong," which is but saying, in other words, that he is wiser today than he was yesterday. So yes, we are much, much wiser today than we were yesterday. And we also brought some other feature improvements. Now, you know that we have been working on a feature model. We've been talking about that already today. Well, the good news is that we finally have support for the provisioning model, which will be deprecated by the feature model. But hey, at least we're making progress, right? So whenever you have a provisioning model-based project, now you have the provisioning model folder that is nicely highlighted and easy to access in such projects. And there's better validation in the IDE tooling. So for you get actually the error markers that are missing before. So there are error and warning markers in your content navigator here. And we also have specific validators for content files, for the content XML files. So, well, if you accidentally happen to do something wrong, we can bring it much more forward to you. For Maven integration, we have quite a number of enhancements. Some things are we have additional preferences. You can enable or disable some validators and some builders in the preference page so you can tune your project better. We have support for the new BND Maven plugin. We've actually started using that in Sling. I'm not sure if someone else is actually looking at the BND Maven plugin. Now, the BND Maven plugin is a Maven plugin for BND, but actually done by the BND team as opposed to being developed in the Felix project. So we've started adopting that, and it has support in the IDE as well. And again, I'm not sure if many of you are using the 5-volt package Maven plugin, which is now open source under Jackrabbit, under the 5-volt project, which is basically the locally packaging part of the old content package Maven plugin from Adobe. Now it's being split into the packaging part and the deployment part, which still goes with the Adobe plugin working with the CRX manager, package manager. Now, Louis XIV famously said, after us, the flood, or après moi le déluge, after me, the flood. That is when he failed an onstage demo. And I hope I'm not going to follow his footsteps and actually cause something very interesting to happen. Now, there is this very simplistic page. I am very detached from all the front-end speakers before. I am basically a back-end guy, so this is the best I can do. So you're just going to have to go with that. Now, the first thing I'm going to show you is that, well, I have an Eclipse instance. This is a very basic application. I have my apps folder and a certain structure, and here is an rendering script. And I save it, and there we go, Eclipse is in the house. Okay, I showed you that 4 years ago. I hopefully have something a bit more interesting. It's lonely in the house, right? Just Eclipse. Now, I've been talking about the command line interface tool. Can I zoom a bit more? Yes. Now that is a basic OSGI application. I have some scripts about the feature model. You're going to find out a bit more later on, but let me just run it. Ignore the exceptions, it's not me. Now, what I want you to focus on is that, well, it's saying that I'm watching a syncdir that is something JCR root file. And that directory is actually very, right, it's also a similar JCR root apps script, right, that just right now I'm doing Vim. Right, I save, and if everything goes right, we have Vim as well. Okay, now, it's a bit less lonely, but you know, it's sort of a date with Vim and Eclipse, not a party, and I'm looking for a party. Now, the newest guy in the house is NetBeans. Now, before talking too much about that, this is just a complete proof of concept on my behalf. I hacked it in a couple of hours. It's nothing extravagant and nothing I would prefer to maintain from now on, but I just wanted to convince myself that it can be done. So I have this nice connect to Sling button. I will push it, it will hang for 5 seconds because I'm doing things in the UI thread. And you can see similar to the other projects. Okay, it still hangs the UI thread. Bum, 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 bum. Okay, and it's a similar app structure, just that I have a NetBeans file. Okay, I save, and if everything goes right, we have a party. Okay, so we have Vim, NetBeans, and Eclipse. And the interesting part is that they're all working on the exact same code base. Now, the content sync is the only part that has been actually abstracted out. So there is lots more code in the Eclipse tooling right now that uses only Eclipse APIs. But the good part is that it doesn't take too much to support a new IDE or a new tool. So what I have here are, I think, 6 classes, and those are all the implementations that I need. So for instance, we have a concept of a directory, and you don't need to actually look at the code, but just see that it's something like 50 lines, 70 with white space. And the same goes for all the other classes. I was talking about thin delegates to actual ID classes, right? So you have just a couple of checks in the constructor, and then you immediately delegate to other APIs. And these 4 classes, the directory, the file, the project, and the resource, which is like a common superclass, are all the APIs we need you to implement. I also added a logger, which is a dirty hack using a console, because I didn't have the time to investigate the actual NetBeans APIs, so you can see them, that it just prints to the console, but that's fine, that's a no-brainer to implement. And then the actual more involved thing is setting up a listener. So this is my way of registering something in NetBeans, and then on this action performed, I just do everything because I'm lazy, right? And you listen to changes, create some objects, and use the specific APIs that the IDE tooling offers you. So in the end, it's not that much effort to support a new tool, at least a new Java-based tool for content sync using the Sling APIs. Okay, so there was no flood, good. Buttons. Okay, now, this is where we are right now. And where we want to be is in the immortal words of George R.R. Martin is, when the snow falls and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. And he was talking about open source projects. And joking or not, I mean, open source projects are only as good as their community is in the end. Our hope is that by opening up the core to be accessible from other IDEs and other tools, we'll have more eyes looking at those, more people using it, and even better, more contributors. So that's one thing. You don't need to code in Eclipse. If you have a problem with a specific tool, you can just go and check out the pure Maven code base and things in there, and it will be much easier to also pick them up in other IDEs. NetBeans is something that we've seen. It works. It's a proof of concept, but if we already have it working in 3 environments, then it means that it's probably, hopefully, okay. We won't expect major surprises. So NetBeans is something that works. IntelliJ is also something that works. The actual AEM plugin for IntelliJ has been reusing some of the Eclipse code so far. We have worked on making it more straightforward. So the API reuse was a bit painful for them. Now, hopefully, it will be a bit better for the future. Now, wrapping up. So this is our entry point for documentation, all the features where you can find out how to install the Sling IDE tooling. Now, as a comment or disclaimer, everything that you saw here in the demo is not yet released. So because we now have 282 Sling Git repositories, I'm going to point you to the exact Sling repository you need to go to. So all the code for the Eclipse and for the command line tools are in there. And if anyone is interested in working on NetBeans, I would be happy to contribute my proof of concept and start working and collaborating for there. And yeah, I guess that's it.